So, welcome to this webinar on Leading with Empathy, Navigating Mental Health Challenges as a Supervisor. We will explore the critical role that direct supervisors and people leaders play in supporting employees with mental ill health in the workplace. We know that early intervention and employer support are key factors in successful return to work outcomes. The 2021 National Return to Work Survey found that workers who felt supported by their employer had significantly better return to work outcomes. However, employer support perceptions have actually declined since 2018, with fewer workers feeling that their employer was actively engaged in their recovery. And this gap in support is especially pronounced when it comes to mental ill health. The 2024 Comcare Employer Survey report highlighted that while employers feel capable of handling day-to-day psychosocial risks, many feel unsure about how to manage a psychological injury once it occurs. The report also revealed a strong demand for more education, guidance, and practical case studies. So that's why we are here today. This webinar will explore practical strategies that direct supervisors and people leaders can use to recognise early signs of mental ill health, engage in supportive conversations, and create a psychologically safe workplace. Before I introduce our panel, we thought that given we have such a broad audience and a large number of you here today with an interest in this topic, we have a couple of quick questions for you. So our first question hopefully has been posted in the Q&A, and you can take your time to respond to that. We want to know, what are 3 ways that your workplace prevents mental ill health? So take your time, think through what you'd like to say during the webinar, and that thread in the Q&A as we move along. You also have the option to post anonymously if you wish to do so. Okay, our second question is going to appear as a poll on your screen. For this poll, can you tell us how can Comcare help you support return to work of people with mental ill health? You can select any or all of those that apply to your situation, and of course your responses are anonymous. There is the last one is for other responses, which you're welcome to describe those in the Q&A as well. So I'm just going to remove that from my screen as well. So I can see those responses coming in. I'll just have a quick look at that before we move on. Right. So some really interesting responses there about practical tools and also supporting suitable duties and assistance with complex cases. So thank you for responding to that. I'll move on now. Appreciate you taking the time. I'd now like to introduce you to our amazing panel. I'll ask them to put their cameras on. Let me have a look if I can see them there. Wonderful. I love it when the technology works. Nice to see you guys. I'll go through the introductions. So I'll start with you, Alice. Alice Hannah has over 20 years of experience in people and culture leadership across diverse industries such as mining, aviation, information technology and construction. Alice is dedicated to creating exceptional workplaces where individuals can thrive. She has led 2 companies to be named #1 Best Place to Work in Australia and was awarded HRD Australian HR Manager of the Year in 2022. Alice also gives back through the Beyond Blue Speakers program and serves on the board of Unison Housing, a social housing provider. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. I don't think I can add too much to that introduction other than to say I'm really passionate about leadership, empathy and leadership and all the topics we're talking about today. So thank you very much for the introduction and for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Alice. I'd now like to introduce Jess Price. Jess is the founder of Paradigm Makers, driving system-level changes at work that prioritise mental health with qualifications in law, psychology and corporate innovation. She combines her expertise and lived experience of a psychological workplace injury to help leaders understand the impact of mental health at work. Jess shares her insights on the future of work and mental health in boardrooms, podcasts, LinkedIn and conferences. Welcome, Jess.
Thanks, Kayleen. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful, and thank you for being here. I'd also like to introduce Shannon Nolan. Shannon is a social worker and workplace mental health and psychosocial consultant. She worked in direct practice in the areas of mental health, grief and loss, and homelessness for several years before moving into mental health education. She is a founder of Human Leadership Consulting and works with people and companies to simplify and build confidence in workplace mental health. She was a standout speaker at the 2024 Comcare conference, earning high praise for her compelling insights on managing psychosocial risks. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you, Kayleen. It's lovely to be here.
And thank you to the audience. I can see everyone is welcoming you as well. So what a great panel we have. Rather than go through all your extensive experience and the reason why you're working in this field, I thought we would just start off by asking you a little bit more about your background, in particular, how you came to be working in this field. Now, I know I haven't said who I might ask first. Jess, are you happy to go first?
I can go first.
Thank you.
So I think given that I'm here because I've experienced a workplace psychological injury, it is always a mouthful when I try and say it. I thought I'd give you a background in what happened to me. So I had recently started a new job and almost immediately I felt overwhelmed. I started to tell the senior leaders around me that I was struggling, but my concerns were repeatedly dismissed. And this went on for a while. And it wasn't until I woke up in the dark one morning and thought, if I go for a walk and get attacked, at least I'll get time off work. It was that moment that really made me understand the impact that work was having on my mental health. And I honestly didn't know what to do at the time. So I immediately booked an appointment with my GP. I ended up going on extended leave so I could prioritize my mental health. And due to some situations, which I'm sure we'll discuss in further detail today, I ended up on leave for 9 months all up, and I ended up with a successful workers' compensation claim. So this experience, it really gave me a deep understanding of what effective and ineffective support looks like when we're talking about mental health at work. It also showed me firsthand how well-intentioned systems can actually fail individuals, and how we can make small but intentional shifts in leadership structure and workplace norms to create meaningful change at work, particularly around mental health. So I think that's enough for now. In terms of my background, we'll get into more of the detail, I'm sure.
Thanks, Jess. There's some very powerful messages there. And I really liked how you finished with the small but intentional, because if we try to think about everything we have to do in one go, it could be overwhelming. But the fact that you can break them down and they're small, but small intentional shifts, but they're significant, then I think that's more manageable for many of us when we think about what we need to do to move forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. Shannon, would you like to add to how you came to be working in this field?
Sure. It was a little bit of a happy accident. Well, maybe not such a happy accident at the time. But as you said earlier, I worked in direct practice for about a decade in what people traditionally think of as social work roles. So in homelessness and grief and loss and mental health, and burnt out after that time. And I know now, interestingly, I think when I tell people that I burnt out in those roles, they assume that it's because I was dealing with distressed people or distressing situations day to day. And knowing what I know now, it was much more about the systems that I was in than dealing with distressed people and distressing situations. And so it's really interesting for me, I think, to take that social worker brain and that social worker thinking about how do we make the systems that people are in better, happier, healthier? How do we have relationships, good, positive relationships between people and the systems that they're in, and have them be really effective? That's probably where I've ended up and where I've spent the last sort of 12 years. When I burnt out, I moved into workplace mental health, and that's happily where I've been ever since, because I can use a social worker brain doing something that's very sort of positive and pragmatic, and interestingly connected to what Jess is saying, thinking that, like, what is this what's the simple things we can do? What's the practical things we can do? What does good leadership and good workplaces look like at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning? That we're taking this sort of notion and theory and concept and taking it and making it real world and practical. So
yeah,
that's what I spend my days now.
Fantastic. And that in my intro to the subject today is what came out in the ComCare survey, employer survey in 2024, was that the desire for that practical. And I think that's what I was seeing in some of the responses there as well. The theory is great, but the application sometimes can be challenging. So that's why it's great that you're all here today to give us, those tips and strategies. Alice, would you like to add anything more about your background, or at least how you ended up in this field?
Thank you, Kayleen. I studied psychology before recognising that wasn't the career for me, and through some happy coincidences falling into human resources. I worked in workers' compensation, mining, aviation, construction, and my career was heading more and more towards culture rather than, operational human resources. And I worked in organisations that had great cultures and organisations that didn't have great cultures. And what I started to see was some themes coming out around those that did have great cultures, had great psychological safety, great empathy, and really strong leadership. So whilst my roles haven't been focused on mental health per se, where I've been trying to help organisations create a great culture, one of the things we do look at is psychological safety, mental health, leadership, empathy and leadership, and really elevating that consciousness of leadership out of the operational into areas like empathy and respect, and how to interact with humans as humans, not humans as a resource. We're not robots, we're all complex, flawed humans. So my work around leadership has been how to balance the need for operational management with how do we lead the complex humans that are in our organisations.
Yes, and we are complex humans. So thank you for that. Whilst you've still got the microphone there, I was just thinking sometimes you get a sense that something's not quite right, whether you're their supervisor or perhaps you're a colleague. I've been in that situation myself. So what are some of the subtle signs that someone may be struggling, and what's the best way to check in with that person?
I think this comes down to knowing everybody really well and having a strong relationship with them, because often the first signs are that they are changing from their normal. So someone who interacts a lot might withdraw. Someone who generally is quieter might be a lot more active. So I think anyone who's changing from their norms in a way that you feel might be impacting them, that's time to check in. Yes, there are some symptoms across depression and anxiety and some of these mental health conditions that are more common than not. I find that the trigger is they just don't see themselves. In terms of checking in, it's a simple, I don't want to quote "Are you okay?" day, but it's a really simple question. It's, hey, I've noticed you're not your normal self. Can I just check in and see how you are? I know that when people have asked me that, it hasn't been embarrassing for them if they, weren't right. Before I got glasses, I used to frown a lot, and I often had people saying to me, "Are you okay?" And the answer was, "Yeah, I can't see." And I never was like, "Oh gosh, how dare they have asked me how I am?" It's a simple, respectful question. And when I haven't been okay, gosh, I've appreciated it. I've appreciated someone saying, "I've noticed that you're not quite yourself, and I'm here to listen to you." And I think that's the first step, is noticing, acknowledging and inviting a conversation.
Yes, yeah, it's and that's great feedback to be given, because I think we all have facial expressions. I'm someone that notices them as well, and you think, why are they frowning at me? Is it me? Have I said something? Have I upset them? And we all have different expressions, so that's actually a gift to get that sort of feedback, because you're mindful then of you saying to someone, "Oh, if I'm frowning, it's I'm okay. It's just usually that's my thinking face," or whatever it is for you. Yeah. Shannon, what would you say are some of the subtle signs, or perhaps the best way to check in with people? Would you like to add anything more?
Just reiterating really what Alice says, which we all probably bang on about a lot, really, like knowing your people to notice something's happening for somebody, to have that insight. You have to know people. So talking to people about their work and their personal lives, and being familiar and having rapport, not necessarily being best mates with your team, but, if you get a sense for people and how they are normally, then you're well placed to notice that sort of when your gut tells you something's off or you see a shift in behaviour than usual. And then in terms of having the conversation, I think, they're conversations that make people really nervous. So that comes from a good place. It's because people want them to go well. So I think just approaching people with kindness and curiosity, even if you are a bit nervous, it's kind of hard to go wrong when that's your approach. And particularly in workplaces, I think the thing that can have an impact is the confidence you have in approaching that situation. And I think for me, a lot of what I hear is, people have more confidence when they're more informed that they don't have to be the whole solution. Yeah. So that can be like, what are those tools and supports and the resources that you can leverage within your work environment or that you can be aware of outside of your work environment that can help somebody to recover who's having a hard time. Awareness of those sort of resources and how to access them can make you feel a little bit more bolstered and a bit braver in reaching out and offering people help.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think as a leader, you feel like you have to always answer, you have to be the support, you have to know the answers to everything. So you look confident and your team feels confident in you, but you don't have to have the answers. You just have to know where to go and to feel confident to have that conversation and build that trust, as you say. Jess, I might ask you, if someone does open up about their mental health struggles to a supervisor, what would you say the best first steps a manager or perhaps a colleague can take at that point?
Listen to them. I know it sounds really simple, but I think particularly when we're talking about mental health, it's one of those taboo topics. And I think we try and shy away from having these conversations because we don't want to embarrass or say the wrong thing. But the reality is when you're experiencing something like depression or anxiety, you typically have a good idea about what you need in order to feel better. And I think just having that open conversation is really important. And so asking, okay, this is how you're feeling. Is there anything I can do to help? And it might be as simple as I need to work from home more, or I think I need to go on extended leave, as it was in my case. And I know that obviously has a lot of practical implications, but focus on the person first and figure out the logistics later. Because if they're telling you I need to do this to prioritize my health, then they're the best person to give you that advice.
Yeah, and in a scheme when, not all mental health conditions are work-related, but particularly when there is that connection to work, I would imagine if the supervisor or manager is thinking about this could be a claim, that is not a good conversation, or not even if they're not saying anything, it's about concern and care first and let the rest of it, that can come later if it needs to.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, my psychologist at the time, he called human resources human risk. And I've never forgotten that, because that's how I felt. There became a certain point where I knew that they were looking at me from a legal, reputational, financial risk perspective and not as a person. So the emails went from Jess to Jessica. Nobody calls me Jessica. And yeah, I no longer felt like I was a valued member of the team. I was just a potential risk that they had to deal with.
Yeah.
And as a person, that's not a great feeling to experience.
Yeah. And I imagine, Alice, that you're giving advice to organisations about these type of things, especially with that HR background. What would you suggest?
Similar to what Jess raised there, is the first port of call is just to listen. We're not psychologists. Very few of us are registered psychologists in these roles. We're not there to treat. We're not there to counsel. We're actually not even there to provide advice. And I'm sure many of us have taken concerns, whether mental health related or other, to people before. And it's actually really frustrating when people just jump in with, have you thought of doing this? This worked for my sister. This has worked for me before. You're not actually actually there to solve the problem. They've been really brave in coming to you with this. They probably were terrified to raise this with you. The fact that they've raised it with you shows that they do feel some psychological safety with you, and to honour that and to respect that, simply listen. As Jess said, ask, what can I do for you? Of course, sometimes people aren't aware of the supports and resources around them, so you can point them to what's available, but without making recommendations. Not, it sounds to me like you should see a psychologist, but hey, here are all of the resources we have available, and even some that might not be your EAP or formal programs. You know, there's so many wonderful organisations, from Beyond Blue to the Butterfly Foundation to 1-800-RESPECT, and many organisations that specialise in different aspects of mental health. So somebody might be in a state where they're not even aware what's available to them. So simply listen, let them know what's available, let them know you're there, and let them know that once you do know what you need, to come and continue the open conversation. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Start with what do you need from me, and the rest will flow. Did you want to add anything more to that, Shannon?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously completely agree with what Alice and Hannah have both said. I think sometimes pressure to know what's out there, like there's authenticity goes a long way with this sort of thing. So actually, if somebody's saying to you and you think, well, this is a bit foreign, or I don't know, I'm not an expert, I don't know about these different resources that are available, to again be kind, to be curious, to explore what's happening for somebody. But actually, a really lovely way also to communicate caring is to go and do some research about those things, and then to go back to that person, you know, after that time, that you might not have to come up with that solution in the minute, or those ideas around those solutions. It can be really lovely to communicate to somebody, that thing that you told me this morning or yesterday, I've thought about that, I've done a little bit of research, I didn't know, but here's something that you might want to think about. So finding ways to communicate caring and concern beyond that initial conversation can be really lovely also, I think.
Yeah. Good point. While you have the mic, Shannon, I might go on to the next question. And I was just thinking about, as a leader, you've got to balance that empathy with still ensuring team performance, accountability, the bottom line. In some environments, that's a tough thing to do. So how does a leader balance that empathy with getting the work done?
A few things probably pop to mind. The first is being clear about people's expectations. Like if we're asking people to be accountable, they need to be clear in the first place. Do they know what they're doing? Do they know why they're doing it? Do they understand how that's contributing to team goals or organisational goals? So we're clear about what our roles are. And then really this sort of idea of normalising feedback or normalising continuous improvement that's strengths-based and looks at opportunities for development. So when we can just make that culturally part of what we do day to day, like what's going well, what's not going well, what can be improved, if we're engaging in those conversations regularly about the way work's designed and managed and what's happening within the team, it's not then so jarring, I think, if somebody's performance dips and we have to manage that. Because that improvement's just culturally normalised and we have that sort of trust and relationship with people. And then the other thing I think that probably comes to mind is role modelling. So role modelling empathy, role modelling accountability, so holding yourselves accountable as leaders, at the same time showing that care for your team. So acknowledging that people have lives outside of work, and that really importantly that those outside lives sit as a priority alongside organisational goals, that people aren't married to their jobs, that they have full lives outside.
Yeah. And perhaps as a leader, sometimes you don't have as productive a day as you'd plan because something has happened in your personal life. So sharing that as well, obviously, when there's a good team culture and that trust is there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Jess, would you like to add anything more about that balance with the performance and accountability, and the fact that maybe sometimes an employee's performance may dip for a while?
I think it's important to remember that the team performance is made up of all of the individuals. And if one individual is suffering, everybody else is going to suffer as well, because they're going to experience that too. So I know from my perspective, I was at work one day and then I just left. And I learned later that nobody in my team had been told where I'd gone, and I didn't know what they'd been told either. So I think it's really important to have conversations, particularly if somebody does need to take time off, have conversations with the person who's taking the time off so that you can together formulate what you're going to tell the rest of the team. And then also understand the impact that their absence is going to have on the team workloads as well, because you don't want to just put all of that work onto somebody else, because that's going to create a whole separate problem. So it's about balancing the individuals within the team and making sure that you're giving the supports where the support needs to be, but then also acknowledging where there are gaps. So it could be that if there is, if you have too much workload because somebody's gone, can you either stop doing that? Can it be put on hold for a while, or do you need to bring somebody in? Just thinking about it from that perspective, I think, is really important.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. And so in that circumstance that you're in, what should your manager have done? Because they didn't say anything. I think there's probably an obvious response here, but particularly if they haven't had an opportunity to ask their employee, what would you like me to say to the team? What would you suggest in that situation?
I think if you can't ask, just say they're on leave. They're sick. I think we think of mental health as different to physical health, but we really need to normalize mental health as well. So like if somebody had a broken leg, you'd say, oh, they've got a broken leg, they've got to take time off. And I think we just need to do the same with mental health. But it also depends on the individual, because someone may not want that much information to be disclosed. So they may not want their team to know that they're depressed or anxious or whatever else is going on. Yep. So just, they're unwell, they're sick.
Yeah.
Unless you have that conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless the opportunity arises and you can ask that person, what would you like me to say on your behalf to the team for now? Yeah. Alice, did you have anything more to add?
I think it's important to acknowledge that empathy and a robust performance management process aren't mutually exclusive. I think sometimes managers think I can either follow this process and have a rigorous, difficult conversation, or I can be quote unquote soft and empathetic, and they're not actually mutually exclusive. You can be empathetic within a framework. And I think it's really important to discuss that with people, to say, hey, this is the performance framework that we operate in, that we have agreed to in signing up to this mutual contract here to be, a leader-employee relationship. And I understand you've got things going on for you, and I want to be as supportive and empathetic as I can be within the framework that we have to work within around performance. So I don't think it necessarily has to be mutually exclusive in one or the other. I think there's an art to finding that beautiful balance, to being firm but fair within a framework underpinned by empathy.
Yeah, that's great, Alice. Thank you. I might move on to, we had some questions come through registration. We had a large number of registrations, so some great questions came through, and we're not going to get through even a tiny number of them, but there were some similar ones. So great questions from our audience. What are some key elements to help differentiate between a normal workplace stress that we all feel and potential mental health concerns requiring intervention? Perhaps the person doesn't have a diagnosis, or if they do, you don't know that. So you've got the normal workplace stress, and then there's potential concerns that may require intervention. Are there any emerging trends that supervisors should be aware of in relation to, the difference between that normal workplace stress versus the intervention, such as returning to the office, workload pressure type issues? Alice, did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. It's a fine line. Life is inherently stressful. We've all got things going on for us that are stressful, and there are aspects of the working environment that are inherently going to be stressors. I think it's also important to understand that not all stress is negative. Some stress can be positive stress to motivate us, to drive us. I think where it gets to becoming impactful in a negative way, that's where we have to look at how are we implementing this, whatever it is that's causing the stress. I think when people's physical health, mental health, and their ability to conduct their lives in a normal way is being impacted by this, if they can't come to work, if they're not able to fulfill their carer or parental duties, if they're dropping their hobbies off and things that are keeping them healthy outside of work, as soon as those stressors move out of, yes, this is a normal workplace activity that's being conducted in a fair and reasonable manner, that is now starting to really impact someone, that's a red flag to go, hang on a minute, let's have a look at this. Are we implementing this in a fair and reasonable manner? Is this a fair and reasonable amount of workload or stress or change to be putting on a person? And then I think we get into that same point we've made before, that we're not counsellors, we're not psychologists. We aren't there to diagnose people. We aren't there to treat them. When it gets to a point that concerns are raised by them or their colleagues or concerns for you, I think that's when you have to start looking at conversations with that person around how are they and what's going on for them, and what is it about what's going on for them that is being triggered by work, and how can you work together to get the person the support that they need while still maintaining what needs to happen at work. And sometimes, like Jess's case, there is a situation where the two can't coexist while that person gets the support that they get, that they need. So it's a really tricky question to answer because it's such a case-by-case basis. So I hope my answer gave some insight there.
Yeah, no, thank you. Panel, Jess or Shannon, did you want to add anything more to that scenario?
Yeah. I think just thinking about, if it comes to differentiating, obviously Alice has talked about, the things that impact our mental health and well-being are really complex and interrelated. So it's not necessarily always going to be clear what's sitting underneath sometimes some of the behaviours that we see. So thinking about both, thinking about the worker and the workplace, thinking about, creating healthy teams or healthy environments and talking to people sort of proactively as well as reactively. But when we start to see a dip in performance or a change in behaviour, we might think about that person as an individual. We might also take a step back and think what's happening in the environment, because good work, healthy work environments are really good for people. So I guess the dangers of assumption are probably very real. And in terms of differentiating, my first instinct is we'll just talk to people. Talk to people about non-work related stuff, talk to people about work, about the design and management of work and how they feel about that. So whether that's informal or that's formal through things like psychosocial risk assessments, or looking at some of those demands and resources as a leader and thinking, well, what sticks out to me, what's familiar in my environment, what can I do as a leader to sort of buffer or mitigate some of those things like overload or ambiguity or emotional demands and things like that can be helpful. But essentially we can't solve the problem unless we kind of know what it is. So just engaging with people in talking to them about what their work is and what's impacting them is probably the best first step.
Yeah, normalising that. I'm thinking, Jess, about the situation where managing a conversation that's become unproductive, perhaps despite well intentions with the employee and the supervisor, but it has not gone to plan. The employee might be upset, angry, or not engaging in the problem solving. What sort of strategies do you think? What do you do in that situation? Obviously, case by case, but and some general strategies to help when the conversation is just not going to plan.
I think it's really important to make sure you do have really clear systems and processes in place. So something that I experienced, I tried to return to work and I kept being told I had to complete the return to work form. I still, years later, have never seen this return to work form. So I don't know if it's because it doesn't exist or because the person telling me to complete it didn't know where to find it. But I was being asked to do something that I couldn't do because no one could provide it to me. And so from their perspective, I was probably being perceived as being unproductive. But the reality is I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And I think that's what a lot of these issues come down to. It's just a lack of communication and a lack of clear understanding about what the process is. So if you can clearly explain like, we need you to do like this return to work form, for example, because of these 5 reasons, and then giving them the form, that at least gives them something to do, and that should help move that conversation along. I think if in a different scenario, something like if you have a mental health first aider at the office or in the workplace somewhere, that's a useful referral as well, because it might be that you don't understand what they're actually experiencing, and you don't know what questions to ask. Whereas if somebody who has gone through mental health first aid training, and I highly recommend everyone do it, it's one of the most valuable things I've done, but being able to send somebody to refer them to somebody who has more experience in understanding mental health and being able to ask the right questions, that should also help move the conversation along.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Shannon, did you want to add? I just seen your microphone's on.
Oh, I just forgot to turn it off. But, if you ask me to add something, I will.
Please do.
I guess just in terms of workplace resources, just being aware of those, that people leaders or that you as a colleague might work as a conduit to functions, to policies. People leaders in particular, I run a lot of people leader training, and I overwhelmingly, when I say to people, does everybody know what EAP Manager Assist is? I think 90% of people anecdotally don't know what Manager Assist is. So if I've just said that and you're in the audience and you think I don't know what that is and you're a people leader, it's a resource that exists to support you in managing people, whether that you've got somebody with a cancer diagnosis or you're managing performance or you're managing mental illness. And so being aware of those resources and having somebody that's well placed to guide you and give you advice, or, your HR functions or your people and culture functions or your health and wellbeing functions, the more we can be informed about those, I think the better off we are. And then being able to share those resources proactively, not just waiting for a crisis, but proactively with our teams, helps us to create healthy environments.
Yeah. Thank you, Shannon. As a manager, how should my approach change when supporting staff through chronic or persistent mental health challenges rather than following an acute psychological injury? I might ask Alice this one. So how should the approach change, right, from perhaps when it's acute, when things become chronic or persistent? Is there any sort of strategies that a manager may need when it's an ongoing situation?
Authenticity in leadership is really key. So I'd hate for someone to think, right, I've got one hat on now, I need to take off another hat and put a different hat on now. I think you should always be authentically you, with the undercurrent of the relationship you had with the person before this came to light, which hopefully was a close and strong and mutually respectful relationship. So the foundation of that should always continue. I think if someone's in an acute mental health phase, just like if they were in an acute physical phase of a physical illness, there's different supports they need. There's a different level that they're able to engage in with work and other aspects of their lives compared to when it becomes chronic. So I think if you just liken it to a physical condition, someone might have, I don't know, had a car accident, and obviously that's a very different phase than 6 months later when they're just having regular physio for the injuries that occurred. So should your approach to them change? I mean, the practicalities change, how much work they can do, what work they can do, when they can do that, what they need. That will likely change when something moves from acute to chronic. But I think that continuity is understanding what's going on for them, understand the impact of what's going on for them in terms of how they're interacting with the work and the team and the workplace. That's going to change, but your relationship to them should always be built on what it was always built on. Like somebody said before, I think it was Jess, you shouldn't completely start treating them like a liability or a risk or a legal, something. You shouldn't automatically change who they are. It doesn't change who they are. It changes what's going on for them and the amount of care and support that they need at the time. So again, your relationship should always be founded on the same respect and empathy and all of those things, but the way you interact with them and perhaps the support you need to be able to support them might change. You might need more support for yourself. You might need more help from human resources or the return to work team or whoever it is. So how you're bringing yourself to that may change, but you should never approach them differently. They're the same human. They're just going through something different.
Yeah, yeah. Very well said. Thank you for that. I'm going to see there's another one there in the Q&A for you, Jess. People worry that if they raise mental health concerns caused by work or they submit a workers' compensation claim, that it'll affect their future job prospects. Often they don't report because of this fear. What would you recommend to say to someone who has this fear?
I was terrified to share. And now I regularly share it on LinkedIn all the time. I'm very open about it.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I do that is because of this fear that exists. And it is a really hard thing to decide to disclose because you don't know how people are going to react and respond to you, and you don't know if they're going to treat you differently. And as the question said, you don't know if it's going to impact your future job prospects. I don't have one succinct answer that will solve all of those problems, but I think what helped me decide I was willing to share was that if people didn't want to work with me because of my experience with mental health, they're not the kind of people I want to work with.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to see that I've shared that I've experienced anxiety and depression and decide that means I'm not the right person for the job, I don't want that job. And I know that's obviously, that's a privilege to be able to say that, but I think that for me personally, that's a really important job consideration, is will people accept me for this thing that I've experienced?
Yeah. Part of normalising the conversation, I guess, but also how powerful for you to realise I don't want to work for them. If that's how they feel, then I'm not the right person for you, and vice versa.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. What a great response. Shannon, I'm just thinking, when a staff member has low confidence and they express self-doubt, so I'm no good at this, what are some effective ways to help them, perhaps for a supervisor, to help them recognise their strengths and build their confidence, especially when mental health is involved?
I think when we're supporting people, if somebody's having a hard time being really clear that the conversations we're having are around support and not performance management is really helpful. And actually, you might need to remind somebody of that a few times. When we're even engaging in the early start of that sort of "are you okay" conversation and thinking about, well, how am I going to comment on this sort of shift in the behaviour that I've seen, really reiterating that actually that the concern for them is the priority, not not the work performance, that is absolutely secondary. But I think also this idea of sort of strike while the iron is cold with teams, like our support of somebody who's having a hard time for whatever reason, next April starts now. It started yesterday when we can set up healthy environments. Part of that, specifically relating to this question, is, am I giving specific, meaningful, regular feedback to individuals, to teams? Do I stay in contact with people? Am I maintaining sort of one-on-one meetings and team meetings, taking 1 minute before a one-on-one meeting or a team meeting to think, well, what's this person working on? What's good about that? How is that contributing to what we're trying to achieve here? And how can I give that feedback to them? So a good job at the end of the year is, important, but giving people really specific, sticky feedback about what it is that's good about the way they work, I think tends to stick a little bit more. And people leaders are busy sharing the responsibility for that with your teams. So encouraging people to give feedback to each other about what's going well within the team and where people's strengths are and how that's contributing to what you're trying to achieve. And just doing that very regularly can feel a little bit less tokenistic, I think, for people.
Yep. Yeah. Shannon, this is a fairly significant, intense question, but I will ask because of your experience, and it has been written to you. So if there's death or suicide in the workplace, how would you manage the grief of those? It says left behind, I'm assuming, from a work point of view.
Yeah, look, it's a lovely, intense question. We're just so bad at grief as a society in general. Because I worked in this space, I get excited. So I'm going to try and keep this short. But there's an expression in grief and loss that people will cross the road to avoid somebody who's grieving. because it's the ultimate thing we can't solve. It makes us all nervous. We don't know what to do about it. And so then we sort of just leave it. And what that does is just make people feel more isolated, and we can't solve the problem. So just acknowledging this is awful. People are having a hard time. People will respond very differently to grief, that there's not a right way or a wrong way to grieve. To being really open and frank and honest about that this is not a process that takes 3 days. This can impact people for a really long time. And I guess maintaining the thing that pops to mind for me in grief generally is being aware of sort of anniversaries, or, there's a period, 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, the energy sort of starts to go away. People stop checking in with people. So actually you might want to offer support early on, but a period of about 6 or 8 weeks later is a really powerful, lovely time to check in with somebody, to see how they're doing, to remember people's anniversaries. And then the other thing specifically relating potentially to suicide is people are very hard on themselves when somebody takes their life in thinking, I should have noticed, I should have had a conversation, I should have done this. And that's awfully demanding, and we need to be really generous with ourselves in thinking stigma still exists. People work very hard to cover up what's happening for them. So if somebody's really unwell or somebody's taken their own life and you're having that conversation with yourself, I should have known, I should have seen this, it's really common that people will cover up that experience. And so we need to go a little bit easy on ourselves about that. And if we're having those sort of thoughts and feelings over a long time, maybe checking in and asking somebody or talking to somebody about that is my very short response to that quite complex question.
It is a complex one. Thanks, Shannon. I'm aware, Alice, that you probably have to go. Do you have time for one more question? Because I know you had something urgent that came up, or can we say goodbye to you now? Yeah, thank you so much. I will do a formal thank you in a moment. But I have 1 or 2 more questions. We've got a few more minutes, and there's some that have come in. There's too many to choose from. So I think, Shannon, you talked about burnout before, and this might be the case for the manager as well, supporting employees and the stress of the job. What are some strategies, Jess, that you have used because you're helping and supporting others? And then I'll hand over to Shannon for her response as well.
This is my constant struggle in life, is how to reduce burnout. It's the things that work for me is trying to limit the amount of time that I spend on work and setting really firm boundaries with that, and making sure that as soon as I'm done with work, my laptop's closed, I'm going outside. But it is really hard. And because I have had the experience that I've had, I know that I am more susceptible now. So I'm really, really protective of my boundaries. And that, to me, I think has been the biggest shift in helping me get through burnout.
Yeah. And Shannon, there's some sort of strategies you'd recommend to a manager on, like Jess has used some examples that have worked for her, and I would imagine it's different for different people, the ones that aren't turning, the laptop down.
Absolutely. I'm just sort of madly writing things down as Jess is talking. I think, look, role modeling, work-life balance as leaders is important. If people, I sort of often make this joke, like people should casually date their jobs. They shouldn't be married to them, where you absolutely should go home on evenings and weekends with energy left over to pursue your outside interests. And I think Alice was saying earlier, a bit of stress sometimes can be good. Like, it can engage us with our work and switch us on and get us motivated. So the realities of work might be that that's not the case all the time. You might be working towards a deadline or an end of financial year or something that means that there's additional pressures, then you can't switch off so well, or, you're not going home with so much energy. But when we're consistently, as individuals, using evenings and weekends to recover from work, that's absolutely a time to then do some of the things Jess is talking about in terms of policing your own thoughts and behaviours around work habits. But also for people leaders, I think thinking about when you're seeing people consistently at their desk long hours or sending emails at 9 o'clock at night, taking a step back and think what's happening within this system that's leading to this. I had a manager in a workshop last week who was amazing, and he said to me, he doesn't really let people cancel one-on-one meetings. And he will let you cancel a one-on-one meeting, but if you cancel two, he is immediately thinking, what's happening in the system? Why do you have to cancel a one-on-one meeting? Why don't you have time for this? Because the priority is actually that we meet together as well. That's also really important. So people leaders just having insight and noticing where themes are emerging, where people are overworking, or we've got some of those demands that we talked about earlier, those psychosocial, demands in terms of overload or ambiguity or emotional demands and things like that. When we can look at those as leaders and be aware of them in our environments and think, well, what's my role here? What can I do to shift this? Then that can be good as a buffer to some of those risks as well.
Yeah. I wrote it down. Casually date your job. You're not married to your job. I think that's a great way to finish off that topic of burnout in particular. Before I formally thank you both, and Alice as well. Before we do that, I would like to let our audience know that we have a very brief evaluation about the panel discussion that you've just heard. It will take you less than 2 minutes, and your feedback is invaluable because it really helps us plan, these series of webinars. So I'm hoping there's a QR code. I can't see everything here on my screen, but I'm hoping there's a QR code in our Q&A that I haven't heard otherwise. Not one on the screen at the moment, but whilst that is, hopefully someone gives me a thumbs up to say that that's working. But whilst that's happening and you're hopefully responding to that questionnaire, it's very brief, like I said, 2 minutes at the longest. I think it's an important and often overlooked part of a people manager's role to understand how to relate to colleagues in a way that makes them feel positive about themselves and their contributions. And our panel has done a fantastic job on that today. So everyone, please join me in thanking our panel for such a great discussion and some fantastic insights into what leaders and supervisors can do to make employees feel safe and supported, especially when they are experiencing mental health concerns. Thank you. I'll get you to turn off your cameras when you're ready. Thanks, Shannon. Now, I'll move on to a Comcare update. Hoping that our slide comes back on. There we go. Thanks, team. That's what I was waiting for. So there is the QR code. So please do take the time to respond to that. Thank you for those responses for our speakers as well. Before we finish today, a few other updates on things happening at Comcare. Comcare is developing a prevention and return to work action plan to support our strategic priorities to prevent work-related injuries and deliver better return to work outcomes. We are seeking your insights and experience in supporting prevention and return to work in your workplace to better understand the current landscape and to identify key areas for improvement. So this is your opportunity to have a say. By sharing your experiences, you'll contribute to the initiatives that we're looking to roll out that will promote prevention and support successful return to work outcomes. So please do take a moment. You can open that. You can open that up now, even if you don't have time to finish it off in the next few minutes, that will stay open. So please do share your insights on what you'd like to see in relation to prevention and return to work from Comcare. I'd also like to remind you all that nominations are open for Comcare's National Work Health Safety Awards. Hopefully a short video will play for you and give you some more information about the awards.
Nominations for Comcare's National Work Health and Safety Awards are now open. The awards recognise and reward excellence in workplace health and safety, recovery at and return to work, achieved by employers and individuals operating across the Comcare scheme. Across all categories, we're looking for nominations that demonstrate above and beyond best practice, significant and ongoing impact and innovation. Nominations close on Wednesday 30 April, with the winners announced at a gala dinner in Canberra in November. If you need help along the way, contact our awards team or visit our website for more information.
So if you couldn't hear or see that, in summary, the awards are, the nominations are open now and they close on the 30th of April. So we encourage you to nominate, or you may know an individual or organisation that is doing great work. So encourage them to nominate, or you can nominate them yourself. And we've pinned a link there for you in relation to the awards. So please get involved. We'd love to get too many for us to have to go through. That's okay. We'll go through them all. We really want to hear about the great work that you're doing out there and some great initiatives. So we're right on time. Thank you all once again for coming along today, for your support for this very important topic and your contribution to this important conversation. I know we didn't get through all the questions, but you know, your involvement has been invaluable. I look forward to your attendance at our future forums and webinars. So thank you so much and goodbye.